Welcome to this Voices from the Field interview. Today, I'm really excited to have Marie-Andrée Girard, who is a medical doctor calling all the way from Canada. It's very, very early in the morning for her, so we must be gentle with her. The whole point of this interview is getting to know what health professionals in the field have been living through during the pandemic, what they've learnt, the struggles they have been through, and the lessons that they want to impart on the general public as well as other health professionals. So, Marie-Andrée, how long have you worked as a doctor? Is this something you always wanted to do? Tell us a little bit about how you got where you are now.
Well, actually, my practice have been 10 years. So I started practice in 2010. It was a really fantastic period of my life. I started as actually a quaternary university anesthesiologist in Montreal, which is the French part of Canada, as a ped anesthetist. And after that, I grew up and I decided to move towards a more rural practice to really have an impact over what the citizen of Canada could have as type of quality of care. Also, I wanted to have a very mature and a very intense interprofessional experience, which in rural hospital, you get a more team-based approach on many of the situation. So now it's been, well, almost 5 years. I'm in north of Quebec. It's called Chibougamau. I work a bit northern in Puverly-Tuck some years, but now I'm based in Chibougamau, which is a city about in the 49th, 50th parallel. It's a fantastic place to work. It's also a very challenging place to work because you're actually quite isolated, but you're never alone. So you're part of a team and you're part of a group of a city that knows each other and that support each other. So that's where I work now.
Fabulous. So can you give a little bit more insight into your workplace and what you do on a day-to-day basis?
On a day-to-day basis in Chibougamau, we mostly what we call a stage 1 trauma center. So we manage electives. So it means we do some general surgery and some gynecology surgery. And we also receive any car accidents, any accidents with firearms, with blades that would happen in the region. And we stabilize them and we, after that, transfer them to university centers. So compared to many countries, actually, Canada chose to have what we call a scoop and run aspect to trauma. So instead of stabilizing them at the site, like Australia decided to do, or many countries in Europe, we actually bring them to the first stage 1 trauma center. We stabilize them, and after that, we transfer them if needed.
Okay,
so
wow.
On day-to-day basis, it changed.
It does sound like there'll be lots of variety, that's for sure, in your job. But obviously with the pandemic, that probably changed things, I imagine, quite a lot, because you were dealing less with trauma and emergency cases like that, and making space for COVID cases and things like that. Can you explain what that felt like, especially, the first wave when we didn't really know what we were facing? How did that change your work?
It changed a lot. First, it changed the perspective because, as I said, Chibougamau is a very close-knit community. So people were really aware of everybody's status or everybody's behaviors. So it becomes the stress of the city and the stress of the hospital just heightened very suddenly. And it became real when we decided, as it was an older hospital, we needed to create space. We needed to create capacity. So we actually passed many evenings just making plans. What place of the hospital I can isolate to have those patients away from the other patients that are not COVID. So that entire mentality was not natural for us. We were not used to having wards. We had only one ward when all the nurses passed from patient to patient, depending on their competence or their inclination. So it was really unnatural for us to have specific team for the COVID ward and for the non-COVID ward. So that was the first difficulty we managed. After that, we needed to create capacity. Since in the first wave, we were really navigating blind. We didn't know what to expect. We have a very broad community, very large community in terms of geography, but in terms of medical disease also, it was really not a sick community, but a community with a lot of what we call comorbidities. So we expected to have a lot of problems and to have problems actually transferring patients to the Southern University health system. So we had to create that capacity that never was meant for Chibougamau, especially for stabilizing patients. So the first thing that were unusual for us, we needed to stop to do electives. So we stopped doing some surgeries to just create that capacity to allow more nurses to be available, more RTs, which are respiratory therapists, and to allow also the team of surgeon and anesthesiologists to join the medical team as just other ends to manage the COVID ward and everything. But we prepare all that, and we realized that we were actually quite safe because our government decided early in the first wave to actually close the travel between regions. So we were more and more isolated. There were no new person in the region for almost 10 weeks. But that protection or that ban of travel actually allowed us to have a very quiet first wave. It was more difficult in the second wave actually, but in the first wave we had the time to just adapt, to accept our new state of working.
Fascinating. It sounds so calm and controlled, but I imagine it wasn't really like that. There was a lot of problem solving and having to think outside of the normal way of doing things, and especially being in such a isolated area of the world that you really had to pull together as a team.
Yeah, it was really challenging at first because especially we had to change even the way we were approaching our own self. We had to, the capacity building, I talked a lot about the structure of the building, but there was a lot of capacity building involved with actually the professionals. We changed our mentality from a title-based approach. So nurses should do that, assistant nurses should do that, doctors should do that, to a more competency-based approach. So it was really, okay, we need a person who is able to do that. Who can do that? And after that, everybody was involved in the discussion. That helped us a lot, and that helps us keep the stress a bit down, because nurses, assistant nurses, RTs, medical doctor, general practitioners, specialists were all involved in the discussion. So everybody was on board when we left the meeting, meaning that there was no corridor discussion or no discussion that were not heard before. So we were knowing where we were going. Even the population in the city was on board many aspects. So it actually relieved us a bit of the stress. What was very stressful is that Chibougamau actually is situated near a lot of Aboriginal communities. I'm not sure the right words in English, but it meant that we were not in silo, we were not alone. So we developed actually those channels of communication that were existing before the pandemic, but that were not used. So we talked a lot with our neighbors to see what was going on in their regions, and to try to predict what will impact. So to try to build capacity ahead of time, especially in terms of professionals. If we were even going a bit more occupied, we built a channel of communication with the other regions. If we needed to have more doctors or more nurses, we can call our neighbors to have them help us. So it was really rewarding. And it was, since we had the chance of having a very quiet first wave, we had the time to actually put everything in place before.
That's great. It really sounds like you found a way to break down the silos that can be in a health service, and sort of forced almost to do things differently. And it sounds like you successfully managed to do that. What do you think was the one key thing that helped you come up with these solutions? You mentioned having everyone involved in the decision making, but I imagine there's a particular culture that is required to do that. It might not be possible in every area of the world. What do you think was the key that enabled you to come together in that way?
Well, since the last, I think, 20 or 25 years in Canada, we have a very strong IPE structure. So we're educated in interprofessional education since a lot of time. So it's part of the culture to work in teams. Also, and my colleagues in rural practice will say the same. In rural practice, there's happening what I call the grocery syndrome. So if you meet your colleagues and your patient in the grocery store, you have a tendency to have a more clear ownership of what your role is and what your place in the community is. So it's easier to make people believe in the goal you're setting, because the goal you're setting is always toward the community, toward this patient, or toward the community as a whole, meaning that everybody is either a parent or a friend of someone in the community. So it means that everybody actually can relate emotionally to the goal and move forward. It's also in the rural practice, since we're a stage 1 trauma center, the role are clear when you're a normal situation, but it happens frequently that you're not in a normal situation. So people have a tendency to be able to adapt, to actually realize, okay, what's the objective, what's needed, what can be done, especially in very isolated region like with the Inuits, when everything has to be flown in or flown out. We have the chance to have a road in Chibougamau. So actually we have another possibility for transport. But when you're very, very isolated, sometimes the only thing you can ask yourself, okay, is what can I teach very quickly? We had the same approach with vaccination and testing. In Quebec as a large, but especially in Chibougamau in the north, we train people that had the foundation of competence to do especially the testing, but we just crystallize that competency into a very small training session or 3 or 4 hours, and to make them able to help with the testing. So it built really fast capacity, because you didn't need to quote unquote import new personnel. You use the personnel on site and just make them more not competent from the basic place, because they were already competent, but more versatile, more agile, actually. So it really helped us. But we couldn't do that if we didn't have first the culture of interprofessional and team building. So it really helped us just build on that movement and pass from interprofessional education to true interprofessional and even transprofessional practice.
Brilliant. So that sounds like a really great silver lining to this very difficult situation. What, in your view, do you think you will take forward to the future? You know, you've worked out new ways of doing things, being competency-based rather than title-based. How much of this do you see carrying on into the future?
Oh, I hope a lot. Right now, I know our different regularity bodies are looking forward to continue that philosophy beyond the state of emergency that we live in right now. I'm always in fear of the natural or the historic cultural background of the healthcare system around the globe with a very hierarchical structure. But I think we've learned that these situations will need a more agile perspective. And the only way, we cannot train a professional from day to day. It needs to be a more agile system. So we need to have that built in our structure, that built in our culture. So I think we're going to bring that back from the COVID pandemic, that actually every professional, when he has a foundation of competence, can build on that and just increase its own practice scope of practice, so it can really work for its entire competency tools that he acquired. So I hope we're going to move through that and we're going to learn from that, because I don't think it will be COVID pandemic will be the last challenge our healthcare system will face in the next like 20 or 30 years. So I think it would be a great perspective. And we also realized during the COVID era that it's not really a question of numbers. I know people like to have numbers, like the number of doctors per habitant, the number of total nurses you have. And frankly, it's not really about numbers when you want to be efficient. It's really about how you use your personnel to the full scope of what they're able to. And if people have ownership of the goal, if you set a goal and not a way to achieve the goal, as a team leader or as a manager, it's actually easier to get people on board because they feel they have a voice. People realize in the COVID pandemic, especially in my hospital, that everybody had a voice. Everybody could contribute to whatever extent they were able to, but the small or the large extent they could contribute actually changed everyone's perspective. It was either just to ask, increase the shift hour or change the shift. We changed a lot of shifts during that pandemic. We took all our nurses, we sent them to the ward, and people were afraid. It's normal. We're not comfortable in this situation, but the objective was so clear. They just move with it. And they know that if the objective were clear, everybody was supported by the organization. Like, we're gonna move with you. So I want to keep that culture of, okay, what can I contribute? What is necessary? So what is the objective? And what is not necessary? So what can be changed to achieve the objective more efficiently?
Fabulous. Well, I hope you are able to push that forward and hold on to all of those great learnings. You know, you talked a little bit about the fear that the health professionals experience, which is totally human and normal. How did you, and maybe you see your colleagues, cope with that personally? Because sometimes we forget that there's a person behind the PPE, and that weighed very heavily on health professionals, and it still does. How do you personally manage your fear, manage the stress? What sort of things have you got in place to make sure that you sort of survive personally? Well,
in the COVID pandemic, what I realized, what made the fear worse was actually information overload. like you receive so much different scientific articles, different perspective, different stories, that it started to become difficult to have your own space. So we, as a group, as a small group, we decided actually to close our phone or computers at least 2 hours a day, and at least 1 hour before going to sleep, because it's really helped us to have a distance and to realize that I was lucky not to have a personal link with COVID. I didn't have any parents or any friends that were sick with COVID, or that was deeply sick with COVID, I should say. People caught COVID, but they were not that sick. So I was really lucky not to have that personal burden more than the professional burden. But the fear was easily to manage when we took a distance. We tried to take a distance, especially with the computers and the iPad and the phone, just to realize day-to-day living. We started also a garden, just gardening a bit, just to have a more sense of what nature was blooming, because in the spring in Quebec, the nature is quite blooming. We're off the hard winter and it's just beautiful. So it gives us a sense of time, because especially in the first wave, we stopped everything in Quebec. So you felt a bit like suspended. You felt out of time, and it was stressful. The sensation like, okay, am I going to be hit by a train, or is it going to be very, very calm? And since we didn't know, and we were preparing for the train, before the train arrived, we decided to have some alone time, just in time with nature to see it grow, just to have a perspective that, okay, there's something that's actually quite normal right now, is just like basilic and other herbs just growing from the earth, and it just gave us perspective. So that's how we decided to manage. And walks in woods, nature helps a lot.
Yeah, nature. And as you said, there was so much information, or there still continues to be so much information, and being conscious of that you can be overwhelmed and overloaded, and to carve out time when you are, information free and just yourself. And I love that connection with nature. You're not the only person who's told the story of, wanting to be out there and seeing real life and life going on. And I love the idea of also the changing of seasons and time, that, you feel stuck in time, but life does go on, and we are moving forward, even if it doesn't feel like it at that moment. And what do you particularly appreciate about your workplace? It sounds like you love where you work, and you like the people you're working with. It sounds like a very good environment you already work in. Excuse me. What do you particularly appreciate about your workplace?
It's really the person. It's really the teamwork we have, the capacity we have to talk to each other, and also to never lose perspective of what we're working for, what we're there for. So it's really a lovely place. And also people respect that you need to have a life. So the work-life balance is actually it's natural for them. The hospital where I work is just in front of a beautiful lake in Quebec. We have a lot of lakes in Quebec. And it's so near nature that if you feel that you need a space to your own, you just put on your walking shoes and you can still be in a reaching distance and be in the middle of the woods. So it's really that perspective, and people actually expect that. You're not expected to be always on, or to be always near the hospital, to be always like 5 minutes away. You're expected to have a work-life balance. And everybody in the team has the same expectation. There's no difference. And since we're able to talk to each other without judgment, especially on that aspect, we're able to move forward as a team and support each other in more difficult times or celebrate the happy times. So it's really that balance that I loved.
I always tell people when they're looking for jobs or going through interviews and things that what I personally always look for is the people that I'm working with, because you're working with them 8, 10, even 12 hours a day. That is actually almost more important than the work that you're doing. It's the people you have around you, because in the end, we're all humans and we need that connection. And it sounds like you've created a very well-balanced workplace where people as people are appreciated, and there's a natural communication and a natural balance with being a person and someone who's contributing to the health systems and helping patients. So what message do you have for other health professionals out there? Have you got a key message that you want to give others on how to approach things in a positive way?
Well, in a positive way, I should say, just remember that you're actually not alone. Because in COVID time, it felt a lot alone, especially with all the protective gear. You're not hearing well, you have all those layers that are between you and your colleague. But you were and you're never alone. Even if you just count the patient, you're actually, when you do general practitioner, you're actually a lot of a one-on-one situation with the patient, but you're not alone, you're part of a team. And you're either part of a team with only the patient, or you're part of a team with more professional than the patient, but you're part of a team. And you can, if not delegate, discuss. With every situation that you find hard, you need to get it out there. You need not to just keep it inside you, because it will make you grow. It will help you pass through a painful situation or a happy situation, but it will help you learn and be a better human being. So just never forget, you're never alone. That sounded a bit Big Brother, but it's it's not meant as this. It's actually, you're just not alone. So don't worry, you have someone to talk to. Your patients, your colleagues, your interprofessional team. Build a team, you're not alone.
I love that. I love that. And do you have any final messages maybe for the public at large beyond the health professionals? Because you're in a very particular situation and you have a particular way of seeing the world. What about for your patients, for the public at large? Do you have a message for them?
Well, be gentle. It's even if we're a very area of consumer-oriented care, it's you still have a human in front of you that can have other issues than solely his or her work. And don't be so there's not a lot of patients in my own practice that do that, but people sometimes have a tendency to be very title oriented. Like, I want to have a doctor, I want to have, well, sometimes it's better to have a fantastic caregiver than to have a doctor. And the importance is the care you receive. It's not actually who gives it. So if it's quality care and it's respect the natural competency and it helps you, just focus on that. And don't focus on the need of having a specific title, a specific professional in your life, because it might not be the professional you need, actually. It might need another professional from the team that would help you the most from your daily life. So it's just be respectful and be mindful and work with us, so we can actually solve the problem altogether.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Marie-Andrée. I really loved your messages. You touched on many different points about interprofessional collaboration, importance of communication and teamwork, the importance of recognizing that you're a human being and getting out into nature and having that break. I really appreciated your comments there and contributing. And now I'll let you get on with your day. What's the plan for today?
Well, today is research and clinical, so I don't know.
You see what comes through the door.
Yeah, exactly.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for your time today, and we'll catch up with you maybe in a couple of months' time.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Bye, Helen.
Bye.